We've been discussing at length the whole concept that if you understand who God is immediately, it dispels every other position of what the pagans believe or heretics believe, everything. If you believe that there's one being and whatever exists, wherever it exists, it's only because he wills it to be, then every understanding of limitation on God has no relevance to God, which is various positions among idolatry. Whether he created existence and he abandoned existence, whether once he created existence, he's locked into the systems of existence. Evidently, there's more than one source, because how could you have evil and good? All these various things, these various positions, which actually foster all these various beliefs of powers outside of God. That's only because they don't believe and understand that everything is God, that God wills everything, and even the systems, as I said, the systems are not separate of God, but they are God. The systems are in place as they are and function as they do, only because God wills the systems should be. But if you cease to will those systems, the systems don't exist. Therefore, God is never limited or locked into any system to anything which he created for that reason. And no power, whether it's nether forces, whether it's the greatest angel, could do anything contrary to the will of God, because the basis for that system or that entity, despite its dimension, negative or positive, is only there because God wills it to be there as it is there. Every species, every aspect, inanimate, whatever it is, it's there and functions as that because God wills it to be that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be. That's basically, but he says something interesting. Very often, to appreciate good, you have to understand what not good is. A person is kind and considerate and giving. To appreciate that, you'd say you have to understand, you have to be exposed to cruelty, to a person who's insensitive. So by seeing the two levels of representation, now you can appreciate what good is. As a human being, we have certain inborn abilities to evaluate. So the way we relate to A and B, A, which is good, we relate to more positively. And because we see the extreme negativity of cruelty and evil and everything else, therefore we choose good over evil. So God himself, it's not, we have to see him creating foolishness to understand that he's the wisest. He created cruelty, so we should understand that he's the most giving and compassionate, indiscriminate kindness. That's not it. Because it doesn't really give us an understanding of what God is. Because if you only see that, meaning in that context, God is the wisest. God is the most compassionate. In every aspect of expression, you have the two sides of the equation. So you have A, you have B. When we talk about God, there's no A and B. Everything emanates from God. So if you understand what God is, that all that exists is only God, and everything that evolves and exists is only due because he wills it to be that. So what is the basis for good and evil? What's the basis for compassion and cruelty? These aren't characteristics of God. These will emanate, meaning separate characteristics, and we get one to appreciate the other. It all emanates from one entity, one concept known, unity of God. Now, because the way it manifests itself, we have the ability to make evaluations and discernments. So we choose between one or the other, good and evil. Do you choose to be compassionate or cruel? But it's all goes back. So everything which manifests itself in existence, at the end of time, in retrospect, we will say, see, all that emanates from God's unity. And God wants you to understand that. That God is absolute, is perfect on the absolute level, and therefore nothing is beyond his ability. Everything emanates from his essence, what he wills. We're created deficiently. You have a question, why we created deficiently? If God could have created us perfectly, why are we deficient? Why do we have limitation? The answer is that's exactly the challenge. It's very interesting. You know, there's certain, what we call giveaways. You'd say, if God created man deficient, evidently he couldn't do better. Right? That's what you would say. So the question I would ask, a child is born, when it comes out of its mother's womb, it's a helpless, undeveloped intellectually, organ-wise, growth-wise, newborn infant. She'd say, if you only saw infants, you'd say, well, evidently, God couldn't do better. But as time goes on and you nourish that child, the child grows into childhood. From infant, then the child grows, develops into adolescence. Then the child goes into adulthood. We see a continuous growth. So what you believe to be deficient, all of a sudden, the deficiency he becomes less deficient. It keeps growing, expanding. And if you have outer influence, such as education, such as love and caring for that child's going to develop certain characteristics or undeveloped senses, which he didn't have initially, but it was all there in potential. And then the child develops further with experience in life. The child becomes even more astute and more wise. So what do we see that? What do we see from that? It may max out at a certain point because man is finite, but within finite, there's what we call perfection. As I always say, is there anything perfect? There's nothing perfect. Why is there nothing perfect? Because since you could have something even more perfect, just because we weren't exposed to something more perfect, but based on what we see, it's the most perfect. It's the most perfect. Could it be more perfect? It could be more perfect. Let's say somebody never saw the Hope diamond, and you saw diamonds of lesser size and lesser quality, but it's one of a kind, color, clarity, and shape. It's one of a kind of a diamond. It is one of a kind. Could there be a better kind? Maybe. But since we haven't seen it, it's not. But let's say you discover a larger diamond with greater quality, purer color. So that becomes the next. But we see from there that within the context of finite, there is perfection within finite. Maxing the potential of the limited, that's called perfect. What I'm saying now, this is trying to understand what the Ramchal is saying. So my takeaway is that just as we see in existence, you take sand, or you take clay and you turn it into a brick, and you take iron ore and turn it into iron by smelting and putting through the process. And you create all the components that you could build a structure, 100-story structure, which is secure. And you're able to take fuel and generate light. What did you take? You took things in their own right. They don't provide whatever it is. But in combination, you have a skyscraper fully functional due to the many things you put together allow it to function. What does that say? So each one in its own right is deficient, doesn't have the full capacity. But you combine them, you've created something. But the architect who designed that building, and the engineer who oversaw its building, and the mason and the ones who put the electricity in the building, whatever, these people, were they born architects, masons, or professionals. No, they developed. So you see everything which is deficient, there is advancement. Therefore, God himself created deficiency to understand that the world itself is not meant to be left at the deficient level, but what you understand, you upgrade and upgrade it. And you reach a level to max it within its context, the way it could be maxed. You understand? There's no oxygen outside the atmosphere of the earth. There's no oxygen. There's no gravity. So what does that say? Well, I'll breathe there even if there's no oxygen. I'll have stability even if there's no gravity. No, it doesn't. You could create an atmosphere there by taking oxygen to be able to breathe there. But there you can't breathe. So when you go beyond the Earth's atmosphere to a certain point, you've maxed out on where man could function. A man could live based on natural resources. Beyond that, it's a different reality. But you understand it's a different reality. There's something beyond. And we understand, continue, there's something beyond it, is beyond the beyond. So any person who's intelligent understands, as much as you understand that you've maxed out and you created perfection, you understand there's something beyond whatever you are. Because there's so many things we understand which are beyond us that we haven't yet achieved that. For instance, science. Science understands, the more they advance in science, the more they understand what they don't yet understand. But science is, we will get there. And through the various research, we continue to come upon new horizons. But they understand we keep coming upon new horizons. That means that whatever you achieve, you're always, as they say, relatively speaking, behind the eight ball. You're behind the eight ball. We've arrived sufficiently, but we haven't arrived. Because we understand there's so much more. The more we understand less. We say ignorance is bliss. Ignorance is bliss. You think you know it all. Sure, when you don't know other things exist, ignorance is bliss. But when you understand how much there is to know, although you know more than most people, but nevertheless, because you know so much, you realize how much there is to know, and it's beyond the person's capacity to know it all. But you know there is more to know. So if that's the case, God, although he showed us, he created something in the deficient state, but he shows even with deficiency, you keep upgrading. You go beyond and beyond, beyond. But ultimately, what's going to be the ultimate objective? Understand that whatever's providing this potential, that being is perfect because everything emanates from that absolute infinite being, which wills all these systems which start at one level and advance continuously to a higher level. We read in the Pirkei Avos that God created the world with 10 utterances. And every day, those utterances brought about another aspect of creation. What he created the first day, the second day. And the Mishnah tells us he could have created everything, just let it all be. But the way he created it was over a 7-day period. It was a sequential creation. He started at one level, and it continued to advance itself. Where did it culminate? It culminated with the human being who's created on the 6th day of creation. Adam and Eve. Now, how do we know that the human being is more than just an intellectual animal? Just from reading the story of creation. What is the value and purpose of existence? The animals, the waters parting, the dry land being seen, the vegetation. What is the value of all that? It's all to accommodate the human being. What's proof of the pudding? So Rabbeinu Bachya writes, why was Adam created last? Because everything that preceded him was only created to provide whatever his needs would be. To address his purpose and value, that was all created prior to his coming into being, which he was created. He was created on the 6th day of creation. So that tells us, based on the sequence and the order of creation, that the human being is the center of the universe. Everything that exists was created specifically and purposely for him, to accommodate him. But let's say God would have said, let it all be at one time. And you have the animals and the insects, and you have Adam. They're all the same. Well, the chimpanzee is the most advanced animal. The human being, not being quite that kind of animal, although he resembles the ape, he's more, he has a greater level of intellect. But if you see the order that the animal preceded the human being, and everything preceded. Vegetation, the water, the land, the dry land being seen, everything, the fish in the sea, everything, all that is its various levels, and we're working up to the finale. What's the finale? What's the objective? What's the purpose? The purpose is man. All that's man. So God, just as he brought about the order of creation, is to give us an understanding of how things work. What are takeaways? The takeaway first is the human being is the center of existence. Everything is for him. And what do we end with? God says to Adam, do not eat all the trees of the garden you're permitted to partake of, one tree not. And the moment you partake of that fruit, you will die, meaning you become subject to death. And he was driven out of the Garden of Eden. That narrative, what does that take? What's the takeaway? That man is responsible for his actions. You were told not to, you crossed the line, you're punished. Now, who told him not to? The being who created this whole sequential existence, which culminated with him, which everything's for him. Just based on the order of creation, now he has responsibility. You have choice. You have choice to eat or not to eat. Because if he had no choice, he had to eat. What's God telling him? Don't eat, if he had no choice but to eat. And since we see there is liability and this consequence that clearly says he had the ability to suppress the desire to eat and not to eat, and therefore he was punished. So as reality comes into existence based on the order of existence evolving, as a result of that, we understand many things. There are many takeaways. If a person would not see God's mercy, we have no idea. People get sick, they die. Nobody's ever recovered. You say, person dies at the age of 100. Is that a lack of mercy? No, that's just the reality of existence. People die at 100. A person reaches the age of 70. He gets excruciating arthritis. That's the reality of being, parts wear out. You buy something with warranty. You have a 10-year warranty. Afterwards, you don't have the warranty. Why? Because the parts wear out. Is that a lack of mercy? No, it's not supposed to last longer than that. It's not called a lack of mercy. So how do we know there's mercy? Because God demonstrated his mercy. Certain people are worthy of mercy, other people not worthy of mercy. So now we understand from God's interaction with existence, if you have your eyes open, there's such a thing as God relates to existence with mercy, with indiscriminate kindness. Many things. So by God interacting differently at different venues, different people, it gives us a certain degree of understanding. And if you have a discerning eye to understand what it's about, and you read the narrative from the beginning, then you understand how the system works and why it works this way. I'll give you an example. A person is born into this existence. Everything's in place. And he believes it's always been this way. What's the person? What does he know? Now, what's his takeaways? He's born, he's amazing. It's amazing what he sees, what the world is. Then he walks down another street, he says, it's disastrous. It's infested with creatures that in a moment you will not survive. That's how dangerous it is. Predator animals. You have to seek refuge. Otherwise, you'll be eaten alive. The man doesn't even know what, he has no idea. He can't even put it in perspective what this is all about. It's like he dropped in from a different planet onto Earth. But if you have a background and you have a history and you have a tradition and you understand where it all came about, and everything has purpose and value, then you're able to start putting things in perspective. What exactly is the objective and purpose of everything that's there? And now that's part of the challenge. How do we see it?